They came from the sea, like thunder, raiders with axes, cloaks of fur, and dragon-headed ships. For 2 centuries, the world trembled at the name Viking. But who were these warriors beyond the myths? Who were the Vikings? The Vikings were a seafaring people from the Scandinavian regions of modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, who left a profound mark on European history between the late 8th and early 11th centuries. Known for their daring raids, advanced shipbuilding, and wide-ranging explorations, the Vikings were more than just fierce warriors. They were also traders, settlers, and storytellers who played a vital role in shaping the medieval world. The term Viking comes from the Old Norse word vikingur, which referred to a pirate or raider. However, not all Scandinavians during this period were Vikings in the sense of being marauders. Many were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. The image of the Viking as a bloodthirsty barbarian is only part of the story. In truth, they were a complex society with laws, social structures, religion, and cultural achievements that rivaled those of other civilizations of their time. The Viking Age is generally dated from 793 CE, marked by the infamous raid on the Lindisfarne Monastery in England, to 1066 CE, when the Norman conquest of England, itself led by descendants of Vikings, signaled the decline of Viking power in Europe. During this time, Viking longships, sleek, fast, and capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers, allowed them to reach as far west as North America and as far east as the Caspian Sea. Their mobility gave them a major tactical advantage and enabled both plundering expeditions and peaceful trade missions across vast distances. Vikings did not limit themselves to violence. They established trade routes that connected the Islamic caliphates, the Byzantine Empire, and Western Europe. They founded important cities such as Dublin in Ireland and played key roles in the formation of new political entities. For instance, Norsemen settled in northern France. The Viking Age is generally dated from 793 CE, marked by the infamous raid on the Lindisfarne Monastery in England, to 1066 CE, when the Norman conquest of England, itself led by descendants of Vikings, signaled the decline of Viking power in Europe. During this time, Viking longships, sleek, fast, and capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers, allowed them to reach as far west as North America and as far east as the Caspian Sea. Their mobility gave them a major tactical advantage and enabled both plundering expeditions and peaceful trade missions across vast distances. Vikings did not limit themselves to violence. They established trade routes that connected the Islamic caliphates, the Byzantine Empire, and Western Europe. They founded important cities such as Dublin in Ireland and played key roles in the formation of new political entities. For instance, Norsemen settled in northern France, eventually forming the Duchy of Normandy. In Eastern Europe, Swedish Vikings connect, known as Varangians, traveled along the rivers of Russia, founding what would become the early Russian state. Religion was another defining aspect of Viking identity. They believed in a pantheon of gods led by Odin, Thor, and Freya, and their mythology reflected a worldview centered on honor, fate, and the eventual destruction and rebirth of the world. Ragnarok. Their sagas and poetry, preserved in later medieval texts, offer insights into their beliefs, values, and heroic ideals. Far from being a monolithic group of savages, the Vikings were adaptive, curious, and inventive. Their legacy is visible in language, place names, legal traditions, and even genetic markers across Europe. As both destroyers and builders, their actions helped shape the political and cultural map of medieval Europe. In sum, the Vikings were not merely raiders with horned helmets, a myth popularized much later, but a dynamic civilization that explored origins and society of the Norsemen. The Norsemen, ancestors of the Vikings, emerged from the cold, rugged lands of Scandinavia, where geography and climate played a critical role in shaping their culture and society. The Scandinavian peninsula, with its fjords, mountains, and forests, offered limited fertile land for agriculture, prompting its inhabitants to rely heavily on would give rise to the Viking Age. Norse society was structured around a combination of clan loyalty, land ownership, and a warrior ethos. At the top of the social hierarchy were the jarls, nobles or chieftains who controlled land, wealth, and warriors. Below them were the carls, the free farmers, traders, and craftsmen who formed the backbone of Norse society. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves, often captured during raids or born into servitude. While mobility between classes was limited, a warrior who gained wealth and fame could, in some cases, rise in status. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Norsemen valued law and governance. Assemblies, known as things, served as local parliaments where free men could debate issues, settle disputes, and make laws. These gatherings were fundamental to Norse political life and reflected a strong belief in communal justice and individual rights, at least among the free classes. Family and kinship were the core of Norse social life. Loyalty to one's family and clan was paramount, and honor played a central role in maintaining social cohesion. A person's reputation could determine their status and influence, and any slight or injustice could result in feuds or blood vengeance. Marriages were often arranged to strengthen alliances between families, and women, while not equal to men in all respects, had more rights than many of their European counterparts. They could own property, initiate divorce, and run households in their husband's absence. Religion permeated Norse culture. The Norsemen were polytheistic, worshipping gods such as Odin, the All-Father and god of wisdom, Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder, and Freya, goddess of love and fertility. Rituals, sacrifices, and festivals portraying a world of epic struggles, mythical creatures, and the constant tension between fate and free will. In essence, the Norsemen were a hardy, independent people shaped by a harsh environment and driven by a mixture of survival, exploration, and ambition. Their society was complex and adaptable, setting the stage for the Viking expansion that would leave an enduring legacy across Europe and beyond. Ask ChatGPT. Viking longships, tools of conquest and exploration. Few symbols are as closely associated with the Vikings as their iconic longships. Sleek, symmetrical vessels that combined speed, versatility, and innovation in a way unmatched in their time. These ships were more than just modes of transportation. They were instruments of war, tools of exploration, and the backbone of Viking power and expansion. Without them, the Viking Age might never have occurred. Viking longships were remarkable feats of engineering, constructed primarily from oak, valued for its strength and durability. Longships were built using the clinker technique, where overlapping planks were fastened together with iron rivets. This gave the hull both flexibility and strength, allowing it to withstand the rough conditions of the North Atlantic. The keel, the ship's spine, gave it directional stability, while the shallow draft enabled navigation in waters as little as a meter deep. This was a crucial feature, allowing Vikings to travel up rivers, through estuaries, and even across marshlands, reaching towns and monasteries far inland. Longships came in various types, each suited for different purposes. The Drakkar, or dragon ship, was the warship of choice, often ornately carved with intimidating dragon or serpent heads on the prow, to strike fear into enemies and ward off evil spirits. These ships were long, narrow, and built for speed, carrying warriors quickly to their targets. In contrast, the Gnar was a broader, sturdier vessel, used primarily for trade and colonization. It could carry cargo such as livestock, timber, furs, and even settlers across vast distances. One of the most revolutionary features of the Viking longship was its dual propulsion system, oars and a single square sail. When winds were favorable, the sail provided swift movement across open seas. When conditions were calm or required precise maneuvering, such as approaching a coastal targ or rowing upriver, oarsmen took over. With this flexibility, Vikings could conduct hit-and-run raids with stunning efficiency and unpredictability. These ships enabled the Vikings to extend their reach far beyond Scandinavia. They navigated the coasts of Britain and Ireland, raided into France and Iberia, crossed the Baltic Sea into Eastern Europe, and ventured across the North Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. The longship's capability to cross open oceans while also traveling narrow inland waterways made it uniquely suited for both conquest and exploration. Moreover, the longship wasn't just a weapon or a trade vessel. It was a cultural symbol. For many Vikings, it represented freedom, mobility, and status. Skilled shipbuilders and navigators were highly respected, and the ships themselves were often buried with their owners as part of elaborate funerary practices, emphasizing their importance in both life and death. In essence, the Viking longship was the engine that drove the Viking Age. It allowed Norsemen to explore, raid, settle, and trade across 3 continents. Without their mastery of shipbuilding and navigation, the Vikings would have remained a regional people. With their longships, they became a global force, feared, respected, and remembered to this day. Religion and mythology, beliefs of the Northmen. The religion and mythology of the Vikings, or Northmen, formed the spiritual core of their civilization, shaping their worldview, values, and daily life. Before the Christianization of Scandinavia, the Vikings followed a rich, polytheistic belief system known today as Norse mythology. It was not a centralized religion with temples and priests like in Rome or Greece, but a decentralized oral tradition rooted in myth, ritual, and the natural world. It provided answers to life's mysteries, explained the forces of nature, and gave meaning to war, death, and destiny. At the center of Viking belief was a pantheon of gods and goddesses who lived in realms connected by the great cosmic tree, Yggdrasil. The gods resided in Asgard, while humans lived in Midgard, connected by the rainbow bridge, Bifrost. These deities were not all-powerful or perfect. They were flawed, emotional, and often embroiled in conflicts and adventures that mirrored human struggles. This made them relatable figures for the Norse people. Odin, the Allfather, was the chief of the gods, a complex figure associated with wisdom, war, magic, and poetry. He sacrificed an eye for knowledge and hung himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain the secrets of the runes. Thor, the thunder god, was the protector of mankind, wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir to battle giants and monsters. He was immensely popular among ordinary Vikings for his strength, bravery, and straightforward nature. Other major gods included Freyja, goddess of love and fertility; Loki, the trickster god whose mischief often led to chaos; and Freyr, a fertility god linked to peace and prosperity. The Norse also believed in a vast array of other supernatural beings: giants, Jotnar, elves, associated with specific places and forces of nature. The natural world was not just scenery, but inhabited by unseen forces deserving of respect, ritual, and sometimes fear. Central to Norse mythology was the concept of fate, or weird, and the idea that even the gods were subject to it. The Norns, 3 mysterious female beings, wove the destinies of gods and men alike. This belief in inescapable fate fostered a fatalistic view of life and death, contributing to the Viking warrior's bravery. If death was predestined, one might as well face it with courage and honor. Death and the afterlife were also essential elements of Viking religion. Those who died bravely in battle were believed to be taken to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where they would feast and prepare for Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that would end the world. Others might go to Folkvang, Freya's realm, or to Hel, a cold and shadowy underworld ruled by the religious practice included sacrifices, bloats, seasonal festivals, and rituals to gain favor or protection from the gods. Sacred groves, stones, and household altars served as places of worship. There was no dogma, but tradition and oral storytelling kept beliefs alive through generations. Ultimately, Norse religion was not only a reflection of Viking life, it was a guide through it. It gave meaning to the dangers of seafaring, the unpredictability of war, the cycles of the seasons, and the inevitability of death. Through their gods, myths, and rituals, the Northmen understood their place in the world and beyond. Raids and warfare. The Viking Age begins. The Viking Age officially began in 793 CE with a raid on the Lindisfarne Monastery, located off the northeast coast of England. It was a brutal and unexpected assault on a peaceful Christian religious site. Monks were slaughtered, sacred relics stolen, and the event sent shockwaves throughout Europe. This marks the beginning of nearly 3 centuries of Viking raids and warfare, an era that would dramatically reshape the political and cultural map of medieval Europe. The reasons behind the sudden eruption of Viking aggression were complex. Scandinavian societies had grown in population, but arable land was limited. Internal power struggles, social mobility, and a warrior culture that prized fame and wealth encouraged ambitious individuals to seek fortunes abroad. At the same time, advancements in shipbuilding, especially the development of the longship, allowed the Vikings to travel. Finally, Europe's political fragmentation made it a ripe target. Small kingdoms, monasteries, and coastal towns were vulnerable and often poorly defended. The early Viking raids were typically small, hit-and-run operations. Bands of warriors would sail up rivers or land on beaches, strike quickly, and escape before organized resistance could form. Monasteries, such as those at Lindisfarne, Iona, and Jarrow, were frequent targets because they were rich in gold, manuscripts, and valuables. Yet lightly guarded, in many ways the Vikings were opportunistic predators, exploiting the wealth and weaknesses of others with surgical precision. However, these raids were not mindless acts of violence. They were strategic, economically motivated operations. Vikings knew where to strike and when. For example, they often raided during harvest seasons or religious festivals when defenders were distracted. Their deep knowledge of local geography, acquired through earlier trade or reconnaissance, allowed them to navigate rivers and coastlines with ease. Viking warfare emphasized mobility, surprise, and psychological intimidation. Their fearsome reputation often preceded them, causing panic and surrender before a single blow was struck. As the 9th century progressed, Viking attacks became more organized and large-scale. What began as seasonal raiding expeditions evolved into long-term campaigns and even full-scale invasions. Viking leaders, such as Ragnar Lothbrok and his legendary sons, launched multi-year offensives against kingdoms in England, France, and beyond. In 865 CE, the so-called Great Heathen Army, a massive force of Danish Vikings invaded Anglo-Saxon England. They captured warfare in Viking society was both a means of survival and a path to glory. A warrior earned honor through courage in battle, and those who died bravely were believed to be chosen by Odin for Valhalla. Viking warriors typically fought with swords, axes, and spears, and used round wooden shields for defense. Armor varied, with wealthier fighters donning mail shirts or helmets, while poorer ones relied on thick clothing. Contrary to popular belief, Viking helmets did not have horns, a myth invented in later centuries. Tactics emphasized coordination and shock. Shield walls were a common battlefield formation, allowing warriors to present a unified front. Quick flanking maneuvers, ambushes, and feigned retreats were also used. The Vikings adapted their tactics to the terrain and the enemy. Whether storming a coastal town, laying siege to a fortress, or clashing with armies on open ground, their success wasn't due to brute force alone, but to discipline, experience, and innovation. Outside England, the Vikings also launched devastating raids across the Frankish Empire. Paris itself was besieged multiple times, including a major attack in 845 CE, led by Ragnar Lothbrok, according to saga tradition. In response, Frankish kings paid Danegeld, large bribes in silver, to prevent further raids. Far from discouraging them, this encouraged more attacks, as Vikings realized they could gain wealth without risking battle. In Ireland, Norsemen established fortified settlements that grew into cities like Dublin. In Scotland and the Isles, they mingled with local populations, intermarried, and formed hybrid Norse-Gaelic communities. In Eastern Europe, Swedish Vikings known as the Rus traveled deep into Slavic lands via river networks, founding trade outposts and eventually establishing the foundations of the Russian state. By the late 9th and early 10th centuries, Viking warfare transitioned from pure raiding to territorial conquest and colonization. They began to build fortified bases, long forts, and overwinter in foreign lands. These bases allowed them to launch further raids and eventually establish permanent settlements. This shift changed the nature of Viking activity. They were no longer just raiders from the sea, but rulers and landowners in foreign lands. Despite their reputation for destruction, the Vikings were also pragmatic. They frequently negotiated treaties, entered alliances with local rulers, and even converted to Christianity when it benefited them. For example, the Viking leader Rollo was granted land in northern France by the Frankish king Charles the Simple in 911 CE, in return for protection from other Viking bands. This region became Normandy, and its inhabitants, the Normans, would go on to make history themselves by conquering England. In conclusion, raids and warfare were the engine that powered the Viking Age. They began as opportunistic strikes, by small bands, but evolved into highly organized military campaigns that altered the political and cultural landscape of Europe. Through war, the Vikings gained not only wealth and fame, but also land, power, and lasting influence. The legacy of their conquests remains visible in languages, place names, legal traditions, and bloodlines across the continent. Vikings as settlers and traders. While the Vikings are most famously remembered for their brutal raids and fierce battles, they were equally skilled as settlers and traders. Their reputation as plunderers only tells part of the story. In reality, the Viking Age was also an era of migration, cultural exchange, and economic expansion. Viking merchants, craftsmen, and farmers established trade routes, built cities, and integrated into local societies across a vast range of territories, from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the warm markets of the Mediterranean. As settlers, they left a permanent mark on the lands they colonized, not just through conquest, but through assimilation and innovation. Settlement and colonization were natural extensions of Viking exploration. Driven by a combination of overpopulation, political instability, ambition, and opportunity, many Norsemen left their homelands in search of better prospects. While some sought plunder, others sought land to farm, coastal harbors to control, or new communities to build. Their advanced seafaring skills allowed them to identify fertile and strategic areas for settlement across Europe and beyond. In the British Isles, Viking settlement began in earnest in the late 9th century, following the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in England. After years of warfare, many Vikings stayed and took up farming, especially in the region known as the Danelaw, eastern and northern England, where Danish law and customs were practiced. Place names ending in by, meaning village in Old Norse, such as Grimsby and Derby, still reflect Viking presence. Over time, Norse settlers intermarried with local populations, adopted aspects of Anglo-Saxon culture, and contributed to the evolving identity of medieval England. In Ireland, Viking settlers initially established coastal raiding camps called longforts, which later developed into permanent towns like Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These towns became vital centers of trade and craftsmanship, where Norse and Gaelic cultures blended. Dublin, in particular, grew into a bustling trading hub connecting Ireland with Scandinavia, Britain, and continental Europe. Viking coinage, crafts, and shipbuilding techniques spread through these settlements, reshaping the Irish economy and political landscape. To the north, Vikings also settled the Orkney and Shetland Islands, the Hebrides, and parts of mainland Scotland. These territories became Norse-ruled earldoms for centuries. In Iceland, Norwegian settlers fleeing political strife founded a new independent society around 874 CE. Iceland became a unique Viking commonwealth governed by the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments, where laws were spoken, not written, and decisions were made collectively by free men. From Iceland, Vikings pushed further west to Greenland, where Eric the Red established a colony around 985 CE. His son, Leif Erikson, would sail even further to Vinland, believed to be coastal North America, hundreds of years before Columbus. Alongside their role as settlers, the Vikings were exceptional traders. Their extensive maritime networks connected the northern world to the wealth of the East and the markets of the Mediterranean. Viking merchants traveled the rivers of Russia, establishing trade routes from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and beyond. These Swedish Vikings, known as the Varangians, were instrumental in the rise of early Russian states such as Novgorod and Kiev. They traded furs, honey, wax, and slaves for silk, silver, spices, and wine from the Byzantine Empire and Islamic caliphates. Archaeological evidence of Viking trade is abundant. Hoards of Arabic silver coins, dirhams, have been found in Sweden, Denmark, and Gotland, demonstrating the extent of Viking economic reach. Likewise, Scandinavian artifacts have been discovered in Constantinople, Baghdad, and even as far east as Central Asia. The Vikings did not just take wealth by force. They also accumulated it through commerce, exchange, and diplomacy. The Vikings established trade towns across their territory. Hedeby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, and Kaupang in Norway were bustling marketplaces where craftsmen, traders, and sailors gathered. These towns served as economic and cultural melting pots, with goods and ideas flowing from all corners of the known world. Norse craftsmen produced jewelry, weapons, textiles, and tools, while foreign merchants brought in glass, silk, spices, and precious metals. These towns laid the foundations for urban development in Scandinavia. In addition to material goods, the Vikings traded in people. Slavery was a common practice, and Viking traders captured and sold slaves, often Slavs, Celts, or Anglo-Saxon. Commerce. Culturally, Viking settlers and traders played an important role in connecting disparate regions of the medieval world. They acted as cultural intermediaries, bringing back foreign customs, technologies, languages, and religious influences. In many regions, Norse settlers gradually assimilated into the local population, adopting Christianity, local laws, and native languages, while preserving elements of their own identity. This blending of cultures helped forge new societies, such as the Normans in France, who were descendants of Viking settlers in Normandy. In conclusion, the Vikings were far more than raiders. As settlers and traders, they demonstrated adaptability, pragmatism, and far-reaching ambition. Their influence extended well beyond the battlefield, shaping economies, founding cities, spreading culture, and transforming the medieval world through peaceful interaction as much as through war. The legacy of Viking settlers and transformation, linking the cold north to distant lands through daring voyages, entrepreneurial spirit, and a deep understanding of the opportunities the wider world had to offer. Exploration. From Vinland to Byzantium, the Vikings were not only fearsome raiders and skilled traders, but also some of the most daring explorers of the medieval world. Fueled by curiosity, ambition, and opportunity, they sailed far beyond the familiar coasts of Scandinavia, reaching distant lands that stretched from the icy shores of North America to the opulent cities of the Byzantine Empire. Their voyages pushed the boundaries of the known world and laid early foundations for global exploration. Perhaps the most legendary of Viking explorations was the journey to Vinland, a mysterious land across the Atlantic Ocean, believed to be part of modern-day North America. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, set sail from Greenland and reached a lush, wooded land with plentiful resources. According to the Saga of the Greenlanders, the Norse named it Vinland for its wild grapes, though other interpretations suggest the name could relate to pastureland or meadows. While the exact location remains debated, most scholars agree that Leif and his crew likely landed in Newfoundland, Canada, at a site now known as Lons aux Meadows, the first confirmed European settlement in the Americas, nearly 500 years before Columbus. The Norse exploration of the Western Atlantic wasn't limited to Vinland. Earlier, around 874 CE, Norwegians had settled Iceland, followed by Greenland in the late 10th century. These harsh, remote lands were not just stepping stones, but thriving Norse communities that endured for generations. Iceland, in particular, became a center of culture and literature, preserving the sagas and poems that still inform much of what we know about Viking history and myth. While some Vikings pushed westward, others ventured deep into the east. Swedish Vikings, known as the Varangians, traveled the vast river systems of modern-day Russia and Ukraine, such as the Volga and Dnieper, establishing trade routes that linked the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. These waterways became vital conduits for trade and cultural exchange. Along the way, the Varangians founded key cities like Novgorod and Kiev, laying the groundwork for the early Russian state. Their ultimate eastern destination was Byzantium, or Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. There, many Vikings entered the service of the emperor, forming the elite Varangian Guard, a feared and loyal bodyguard unit composed mostly of Norse and Anglo-Saxon warriors. These Vikings brought back tales of Constantinople's splendor, architecture, and wealth, stories that stood in stark contrast to the rugged. Through exploration, the Vikings expanded the geographic, cultural, and economic horizons of their time. They weren't simply looking for land or treasure. They were establishing connections, forging alliances, and learning from the people they encountered. Their voyages from Vinland to Byzantium not only showcase their navigational mastery, but also their adaptability and enduring quest for opportunity. The Vikings' spirit of exploration left an indelible mark on both European and world history, opening paths that would be rediscovered and followed centuries later. Famous Vikings. From Ragnar to Harald Hardrada, the Viking Age produced a host of legendary figures whose names have echoed through history and myth. From larger-than-life warriors to shrewd kings and explorers, these individuals helped shape the course of Viking expansion and left enduring legacies. Ragnar Lothbrok is one of the most famous Viking figures, though his life is shrouded in legend. Believed to have lived in the 9th century, Ragnar is celebrated in Norse sagas as a fearsome warrior and cunning raider. He is said to have led daring attacks on Paris and Anglo-Saxon England, and to have fathered several famous sons, Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Ivar the Boneless, Ragnar's son, was a real and formidable leader. Despite his mysterious nickname, possibly referring to a medical condition or his agility, Ivar was instrumental in leading the great heathen army that invaded England in 865 CE. Known for his tactical brilliance and ruthless methods, Ivar played a key role in establishing Viking control over parts of England. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, stands out not for conquest, but for exploration. Around 1000 CE, he became the first known European to set foot in North America, in a region he called Vinland. Centuries before Columbus, Harald Hardrada was a warrior king whose life bookends the Viking Age. A veteran of the Byzantine Varangian Guard and King of Norway, Harald sought to claim the English throne in 1066. His death at the Battle of Stamford Bridge marked the end of the Viking Age, but his legacy as the last great Viking warrior remains secure in history. Ask ChatGPT. The end of the Viking Age. The Viking Age, which began with the brutal raid on Lindisfarne in 793 CE, drew to a symbolic and historical close in 1066 CE, with the death of King Harald Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Over nearly 3 centuries, the Vikings had transformed from seaborne raiders into powerful settlers, traders, and rulers. But by the mid-11th century, the world had changed, and the age of Viking expansion came to an end due to a combination of political, religious, military, and societal shifts, both within Scandinavia and across Europe. One of the key factors in the decline of Viking activity was the Christianization of Scandinavia. As Viking leaders converted to Christianity, often for political alliances and legitimacy, they gradually abandoned traditional raiding, which had often targeted Christian monasteries and settlements. By the early 11th century, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden had all officially embraced Christianity. With conversion came closer ties to the rest of Christian Europe, new laws, and a shift in cultural values. The old pagan warrior ethos that had fueled raiding and exploration began to fade. Another major change was the centralization of power. In earlier centuries, Viking expeditions were often led by ambitious chieftains seeking wealth and fame. But as kings gained more authority, especially in Norway and Denmark, independent raiding became more difficult. Monarchs demanded loyalty, collected taxes, and focused on building stable kingdoms instead of overseas plundering. In Europe, former Viking targets had also grown stronger and better defended. England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire developed more unified states with standing armies and fortified towns, making them harder to attack. The feudal system provided better military organization, and many coastal areas were now prepared for Viking-style assaults. The decisive turning point came in 1066, when Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway and a veteran of the Byzantine Varangian Guard, invaded England to claim the throne. He was met by the forces of Anglo-Saxon King Harald Godwinson at Stamford Bridge. In a brutal battle, Harald was killed and his army was defeated. Just weeks later, Harald Godwinson himself was killed at the Battle of Hastings by the Normans, descendants of Vikings who had settled in northern France a century earlier. Ironically, while this marked the end of Viking invasions, it also showed how deeply the Viking legacy lived on, reshaped into the new feudal and Christian world. By the late 11th century, Norse society had been transformed. Raiding declined, long-distance expeditions slowed, and Scandinavia became integrated into medieval Christendom. The saga, the Viking Age, ended not with the extinction of the Norse people, but with their assimilation into the broader European world. Their warriors became knights, their gods were replaced by saints, and their longships gave way to crusading fleets. Yet their legacy remains, etched into the history, culture, and geography of the lands they touched. Legacy of the Vikings in modern culture. The legacy of the Vikings lives on vividly in modern culture, where their image has evolved from brutal raiders to complex, iconic figures celebrated in literature, media, and national identities. Far beyond their Scandinavian homelands, the influence of Viking history and mythology continues to shape contemporary imagination and global culture. One of the most visible areas of Viking legacy is popular media. Television series like Vikings and The Last Kingdom have brought Norse sagas to life, blending historical events with mythic storytelling. Video games such as Assassin's Creed Valhalla and God of War Ragnarok offer immersive experiences rooted in Viking warfare, exploration, and mythology. These portrayals often romanticize the Norse warrior spirit, while introducing global audiences to figures like Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, and the gods Odin and Thor. Viking mythology also plays a central role in modern fantasy and superhero fiction. Marvel Comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe have reimagined Norse deities like Thor and Loki for new generations, blending ancient myth with modern storytelling. Meanwhile, Authors such as J.R.R. Tolkien drew inspiration from Norse legends to shape his Middle-earth universe, incorporating elements like runes, dwarves, and epic quests. Culturally, the Vikings have become symbols of strength, resilience, and freedom, often used in sports team names, branding, and festivals. Scandinavian countries, especially Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, embrace Viking heritage as a source of national pride, highlighting their maritime legacy and adventurous spirit. Moreover, archaeological discoveries, museum exhibits, and historical research continue to deepen public understanding of the Viking world, correcting old stereotypes and emphasizing their roles as explorers, settlers, and innovators. In sum, the Vikings have become more than historical figures. They are powerful cultural icons whose enduring legacy continues to fascinate, inspire, and shape our understanding of the past and present.